Hi booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be doing a tag for Tag Tuesday. It's the Muppets Tag by Gareth from Books, Songs and Other Magic. And it's a lovely tag using various Muppets to get you to talk about books. He was kind enough to tag me in the original video and then just to give me the extra encouragement to do the tag, I was tagged by James from Quaint and Curious Volumes as well. So let's jump right in. I'll give you the warning that I'm filming this late at night. I kind of feel like some of my choices are a little bit left field for the answers, so we'll see how it goes. Number one is Kermit, name a book with a great leader. And this, we're starting off how we mean to carry on. I picked up the Glass Bead game by Hermann Hesse, which is a really odd book about it's sort of a commentary on academia and on almost on religion and on the idea of a guru and a spiritual leader and stuff like that. And our main character, who's picked up by this academic institution quite early in life, rises through the ranks in a kind of academic way, in the way he's able to excel in his field. He sort of does become this kind of guru-like figure who's really respected and revered. But what I found really intriguing and something that sort of set him out in my mind as someone who I thought was a great leader and a kind of different leader, I suppose, sort of someone who defied my expectations in a way, was that he sort of saw the world that he was in, this very separate kind of ivory tower that he was in, and wants to not necessarily transcend it, but just realizes the all of the problems that come along with sort of separating yourself off from the rest of the world, and he wants to break free of that, and I found that absolutely I mean, I sort of battled with this book. There's a prompt later on about a book that had to win you over, and eventually this did win me over, but it took most of the book to do that, but by the end it had. But even maybe 60 pages or so before the end, I wasn't sure if I was going to love it. But this decision that he makes late in life to break away from the structures that had nurtured him and sort of brought him to where he was, I found really, really interesting. And so that was sort of why this stood out when I was thinking of a book with a great leader and a notable leader, I suppose. Number two is Fozzie Bear, name a book that makes you laugh. I suppose there were all kinds of books that I could have chosen for books that make me laugh in certain ways. There's a certain kind of laughter, a certain kind of humour that I kind of want to foster a little bit more from day to day, and that's that kind of almost dry observational humour that just kind of makes you chuckle, and just brings almost a little bit more texture from to your day-to-day life. And I feel like you get that in spades in the short stories of Lydia Davis. I think I've said before that her short stories, particularly there are some very, very short stories in here that are just a paragraph. Some of them that are just a sentence or two. But I've said before that there's something kind of like a New Yorker cartoon or something like that to her humour, and it's something I really love about her, this wry observational humour. So I really enjoy Lydia Davis. Number three is Animal, name a book that's unpredictable. For this I went with If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino. It opens, let's see if I can read the first sentence or so. It opens with the beginning of a novel, as you'd expect. Well, actually, it begins, I forgot, it begins with a kind of introduction to the novel. It says, you're about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel. If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, relax, concentrate, dispel every other thought, let the world around you fade. Best to close the door. The TV is always on in the next room. Tell the others right away. No, I don't want to watch TV. Raise your voice. They won't hear you otherwise. I'm reading. I don't want to be disturbed. Maybe they haven't heard you. With all that racket. Speak louder. Yell. I'm beginning to read Italo Calvino's new novel. Or, if you prefer, don't say anything. Just hope they'll leave you alone. So it starts like that, sort of firmly giving you the idea that the novel, in its own weird way, is addressing you as the reader. As the novel then goes on, one of the weird things it does is it turns that reader that's being addressed into its own character that isn't you. It doesn't really take that long for that disconnect to happen, really. But then we get this beginning of a novel. The novel begins in a railway station. A locomotive huffs, steam from a piston covers the opening of the chapter. A cloud of smoke hides part of the first paragraph. In the odour of the station there is a passing whiff of station cafe odour. There is someone looking through the befogged glass. He opens the glass door of the bar. Everything is misty. Inside too, as if by nearsighted eyes or eyes irritated by coal dust. The pages of the book are clouded like the windows of an old train. The cloud of smoke rests on the sentences. It is a rainy evening. The man enters the bar. He unbuttons his damp overcoat. A cloud of steam enfolds him. A whistle dies away along tracks that are glistening with rain as far as the eye can see. So it moves from that very self-aware sort of description of the book you're reading into the book you're reading, and then eventually the story just breaks off and it goes back to you, the reader, reading it, realising that it's broken off, and that the next chapter is a completely different story. And that's the kind of structure of the book, is finding this totally different story, the reader going back to the bookshop to complain, meeting other people, and sort of going on this quest to work out what the story actually is and what the book actually is, and it sort of turns into this really strange and delightful wild goose chase. I really liked it. Some people are a bit put off and confused by the structure, but it's certainly unpredictable the first time around. Number 4 is Statler and Waldorf. Name a book that had to win you over. This isn't, yeah, it's another one that took a while to get, but I really value. And it's The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald, a writer I really love and really enjoy. And he's one of these authors that doesn't fit, he doesn't fit very neatly into any particular box. And I was introduced to him at university for a course that I was doing, where every week we'd have a selection of sort of samples and essays and things, and one of the samples we had one week was the first chapter of The Rings of Saturn, and we weren't really supposed to read the whole thing. The professor just wanted us to read the first chapter to get a sense of it and an understanding of what he's doing and so on. And I can remember starting it and having absolutely no idea what I was reading. I had no idea if it was an essay, if it was autobiography, if it was fiction. And with Sebald, when he's writing, it's kind of all of those things at once. And we're kind of touching on a theme that's going to happen quite a lot in this video where I choose a book that could have worked with another prompt. Later on, there's another prompt about books that don't fit neatly into any particular genre. And certainly Sebald's writing could have been used as that. And the Rings of Saturn is essentially it's a story of a walking tour that Sebald, or the narrator, takes in Sussex along the coast. And the main thread is him describing the walk and the places he goes and the people he meets. But it's not just the walk, it's not just that very simple narrative, but it's almost as if you're with him as he's walking and his mind is just alive and just firing on all cylinders, and it's going in all kinds of directions. He's making all kinds of associations, and suddenly there are chapters that are just, there's this bit where he randomly goes into this history about a Chinese railway that oddly enough becomes, there is a connection to where he's, the area where he's walking, but he just, his mind just goes off in this massive digression, and you get this crazy history about this Chinese railway. There's silkworms in here. There's this random digression, that sort of memory of visiting these people in a house that's hauntingly beautiful. And then there's just this really uncanny tone over the whole thing as well, which to a certain extent must have been a reflection of the landscape and just how he was feeling. But it's just a really, really odd book, and I was so confused and perplexed by the first chapter when I first read it. But kind of grew to love it over time, and then eventually read the whole book, and really enjoyed it. And then I've gone on to read more by Sebald, and I really love him, and he's a writer that I really value. And so yeah, I'm glad that this book won me over. Then we're on to number 5. This is Ernie. Name a character that is innocent or naive or both. And I've just in the last few days started rereading Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, and the main character, Catherine, is very naive and very innocent. So it's very much about her first time sort of out of the nest, I suppose, out of her parents' control, with some family friends in Bath, and I don't know, being shown the ropes, being shown society, what it's like going to balls and meeting people and making acquaintances and making friends, and she's very much an innocent who is finding her feet, who has all of her own misconceptions about the world, and she's an avid reader of Gothic fiction, and so she's sort of seeing everything through this strange, romanticised sort of film through everything. And her best friend that she meets there is called Isabella, and the way they talk to each other, they're both absolutely enraptured by these Gothic novels, and so the way they talk to each other is so hyperbolic and over the top. But it just reminds you of just listening to the way that, maybe teenagers speak to each other when two close friends are talking, and are just so excited to be in each other's company, and there's this real lovely innocence and energy to the way they're talking. So certainly there's a lot of innocence and certainly a fair bit of naivety going on in Northanger Abbey with Catherine. Next up to number 6, which is Gonzo the Great, and name a book that doesn't fit neatly into any genre. Another book I'm reading at the moment it's not really the book that I'm here to talk about, but I've just started reading selected poems of Fernando Pessoa. This is a little larger than the entire universe, and for some reason, just I think it was earlier today, I was just wondering, if someone was to ask me, what are you reading? And I was to say, oh, I'm reading Fernando Pessoa at the moment, and they were to ask me, who is he, what did he write and stuff. Like, how could I even, in a sentence or two, describe exactly what Fernando Pessoa was doing, what he was like as a writer, because there's so much going on, and I feel like for a few years I've been really quite intrigued by Pessoa, but I think only recently I'm coming to understand him and really appreciate him in a new way. So the book I've got is his most famous book, the Book of Disquiet, and I don't really know how to describe it. It's not poetry, but there are bits of it that feel like prose poetry. It's not fiction, but elements of it are clearly fictional. There are bits of it with a sort of narrative going on, but bits that clearly aren't, that are more like a journal, a kind of diaristic or aphoristic. And it's essentially just these two characters. There are two versions of the book, and this edition here gives us both of them. These two characters, these two heteronyms, which is what Fernando Pessoa called these characters that he's writing the voice of, and he gave their own lives, and it is just their brains and their outlook on life on the page. But it's really hard to, it's labelled here as fiction, but I don't know, it'd be hard to sell to anyone as fiction, because nothing really happens. Someone is just talking about themselves, about their ideas about the world, about strange dreams, and sometimes there are bits that are these quasi-poetic, almost religious kind of invocations. They're not necessarily describing anything and not telling you anything. They're just a voice crying out to somewhere, and it's hard to explain it more than that. But I'm really intrigued by Pessoa, and I kind of love the way in which I can't adequately describe exactly what it is that he's doing. Then number 7, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew, which is a book with a great concept. And I thought I'd go with some clear non-fiction here. And I've got a non-fiction book where, in a way, the concept of the book, when I first read it, was a little bit distracting. And it's the House of Government by Yuri Slezkine, and the subtitle is A Saga of the Russian Revolution, and it's what it says on the tin. It is a history of the Russian Revolution, but the thing that kind of sold it to me, and the thing that was almost distracting me, is the way in which the sort of grounding element of this book is a particular house, a particular place, the House of Government, or the house on the embankment in Moscow. And this was a house that was built, I think, in the 20s or maybe the very early 30s for government officials, and maybe not just government officials, but certainly a lot of people with very official jobs were living there, and many people who would eventually be arrested and killed in Stalin's purges in around 1937 were living there, and you can almost see in the way people were moved around from floor to floor in the building, the way in which people's fates were changing, and then in the architecture of the building itself, the kind of failed vision of the Soviet experiment. And so it was a really fascinating and sobering and eye-opening look at Soviet history. It's not something I'm particularly familiar with, so I was really quite quite impressed and quite grateful for the way the book went. But certainly, in a way, I mean, that concept of using the building as its core grounding element was really interesting. However, the book is much broader than that, and it really is a whole history of initially the revolution and then its aftermath in the sort of Stalinist period. And there's just much more to it than I was expecting. So there's a great concept, but then just great execution and just more than you could ever expect in this book. And then next up to number 8, which is Dr. Teeth. Name a character that lights up the scene and makes you smile. I'm staying with a very strong Russian element. And I thought I'd go with Denisov, a character from War and Peace, who I got a little confused with another character the first time I read him, the first time I read the book. But then the second time through, he was just this character who really came alive for me. He's more of a secondary character. He's a soldier. He's one of the main characters' sort of best friends. And he falls in love with one of the other characters and is unlucky, but deals with it gracefully. And he has a grace and a generosity to him that some of the other characters in the book don't have. And so there's a real earthy humanity to him that some of the characters don't have, whether it's because they're quite shallow or whether it's because they're still trying to work themselves out. And so there's always something quite refreshing to meeting Denisov. And I can remember I was in a group reading War and Peace just over a year ago. And I can remember saying in the group that I just loved whenever he'd turn up. There were long stretches of the book where he wasn't mentioned at all, and you'd sort of worry whether he'd been killed or something. He's a soldier, it's an occupational hazard. And then he turns up, and it's like running into one of your best friends at a street corner or something. I'd always be so delighted whenever he turned up. So he was a character who always made me smile. And in a book this big, it's always good to have at least one or two characters like that. Number 9 then is Rowlf the Dog. Name a character that is laid back and copes with the chaos around them. I think I've got a bad answer for this, because I was immediately thinking of the laid back element, and I was thinking of Zapod Beeblebrox from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But really he can't cope with anything, and he's a narcissist, and he just runs away from his problems, which I suppose in its own way is a way of coping. But he doesn't really manage to cope at all with the problems around him. But panic glasses are a great option, I suppose. And then finally, the last prompt is The Muppets. Name a book with a great found family. I kind of struggled with this one. I think it was one I found maybe the hardest. Maybe it's because it's not something I tend to look out for in a book, and so maybe if I had spent a bit longer thinking about it, I might have found a slightly more accurate book to sort of piece together with this prompt. But I went with an odd one. I went with Don Quixote, because although it was only 2 people, we think of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, their friendship is, I think in its own way, quite familial, and quite natural in a way, and in a way they kind of complete each other. Don Quixote doesn't always really understand, or rarely really understands, Sancho Panza because, you know, he's just in his own world. But then Sancho Panza, I don't know, there's a real loving loyalty to him. There's a deadpan sort of humour in the way that there are certain things he just won't go along with, and will just say outright that he's not going to go along with. But they very much need each other in their own way to sort of, I don't know, for one to have something to believe in and to work towards, and for the other to have someone to give them confidence and just to feel like you got someone behind you, I suppose. And it's a very odd and quirky relationship that I find fascinating, and I really need to reread Don Quixote at some point, maybe in another translation. But I really love spending time with those two, and find their relationship really heartwarming. And that's it. That is the end of the Muppets tag. So before I go, I'm going to tag 3 people. I'm going to tag Lukash from A Cruel Reader's Thesis, who is making videos again, and that's really lovely. I'll tag Will Chambers to coax him to start making videos again, because it's been a while since he's made a video. And I'll tag Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. But that's the end. I'm going to put these books away and then go to sleep. But thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.